I'll never forget the moment my own daughter looked me dead in the eye and told me I didn't deserve to eat at my family's Thanksgiving table. She said it so calmly, like she was announcing the weather. "Dad, you didn't contribute this week," she said in front of everyone. "Don't make it awkward." I stood there, plate in hand, while my grandchildren stared in silence. The smell of roasted turkey filled the room, the sound of silverware scraping against plates. Everything kept moving as if I wasn't even there. My grandson Oliver reached across the table to hand me a bread roll. But before I could take it, my daughter's voice snapped through the air. "Oliver, sit down." The roll dropped from his tiny hand. The room went dead quiet. I could hear the faint ticking of the old wall clock, the same one that had hung in my home for 30 years, back when it was truly my home. But now I was just a guest. No, not even that. A burden. I stood there for a moment longer, the heat from the kitchen washing over my face, before setting the empty plate down and walking toward the hallway. Nobody stopped me. Not a word. I could have shouted. I could have thrown every truth I knew straight at them, about the house, the money, the sacrifices, but I didn't, because I wasn't finished yet. They thought I was weak. They thought age had softened me. They forgot that I used to build empires from nothing but busted tools and dirty hands. My name is Walter Kane. I'm 64 years old, a retired diesel mechanic out of Cincinnati, Ohio. I've been called a lot of things in my life. Stubborn, proud, difficult. Maybe they were right. But what I've never been is a fool. 2 years ago, when my wife Margaret passed away, I sold our old home and moved in with my daughter, Clara, and her husband, Trent. They told me it was my home, too. Their words, not mine. I remember the first morning I woke up there, the smell of coffee, Clara humming in the kitchen, sunlight spilling through the blinds. For a moment I thought maybe life could still be gentle. But little by little that warmth faded. The way they talked to me changed. The way they looked at me. They started calling it their house. Started setting rules. Then came the bills. "Dad, could you help with utilities?" $650 a month. I didn't argue. I paid. I fixed everything that broke. The furnace, the water heater, Trent's car. I was trying to be useful. Trying to be family. But family isn't about what you give. It's about what they decide you're worth. And that Thanksgiving they decided I was worth nothing. That was their mistake. Because while they were carving turkey and toasting to their perfect lives, I was standing in the hallway, looking at a framed picture of my wife on the wall. And I remembered something they didn't know. You see, the deed to this house, the one they're living in, laughing in, disrespecting me in, still has one name written at the very top. And that name is mine. What they didn't know is that Thanksgiving wasn't the end. It was just the audit, and I was about to balance the books. I didn't touch a thing that night. Didn't raise my voice. Didn't slam a door. I simply went back to my room, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the floor. The sounds of laughter floated in from the dining room, my daughter and her husband. Clinking glasses. My grandkids giggling at the TV. It was a good life, I thought. They just forgot who built it for them. I looked over at the old wooden chest by the window, Margaret's chest. She used to keep her quilting fabric inside. After she passed, I filled it with the papers she told me never to lose. I unlocked it and opened the lid. Inside were folders, deeds, receipts, the bones of a life's work. At the very top was the house deed. My signature, clear as daylight, her name right beside mine. I'd added Clara's name to the insurance policy once, back when I trusted her word. But the ownership, the bricks, the land, that was still mine. For a long time, I just sat there, running my hand across Margaret's name. She used to say, "Walter, kindness doesn't mean you let people step on you." She was right. The next morning, I got up before anyone else. I brewed a pot of coffee, the way she liked it, and sat at the kitchen table with my notebook. I started writing down numbers, utilities, groceries, car parts, repairs, every dollar I'd ever given, every broken thing I'd ever fixed. I wasn't doing it out of anger. I was doing it for clarity. Because sometimes, to see how deep the rot goes, you've got to pull up the floorboards. By the time Clara walked into the kitchen, I'd already filled 4 pages. She barely looked at me, just grabbed her oat milk, poured it into her mug, and asked if I could take Oliver to school again. I smiled and said, "Of course." She didn't notice the look in my eyes. When she left, I went to the attic. There was an old metal box up there, tucked behind a crate of Christmas decorations. Inside were documents from before she even met Trent, bank accounts, property transfers, a few things my lawyer had insisted I keep. Most people think retirement makes you slow, but when you've spent your life fixing engines, you learn how systems work, how every piece depends on another. One wrong bolt and the whole thing falls apart. By noon, I had everything I needed. When Trent came home that evening, he barely looked at me. Just tossed his coat on the chair and asked if I'd paid the electric bill yet. I told him I had. Then I handed him a folder. "What's this?" he asked. "An audit," I said, "since I apparently don't contribute." He opened it. Inside were copies of every payment I'd made since moving in. A detailed list of repairs, photos of receipts, and one small note at the bottom, handwritten. "Effective immediately. I will no longer be paying rent or utilities on a property I own." He laughed at first, thinking it was some kind of joke. "Walter, come on. We've all had a rough week." I just smiled. "You should read the last page." He flipped it over. And that's when his face changed. It was the updated property record. Dated 3 months before Margaret died. A transfer of ownership, back to me fully. No signatures missing. No loopholes, just my name. He looked up, his voice low. You're serious?" "I'm done being your tenant," I said quietly. "From now on, you're mine." For the first time, he didn't have anything smart to say. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need revenge yet. I just needed silence, the kind that made people think. Because this wasn't about anger anymore. It was about reminding them who they were dealing with. That night, I heard them whispering in their room. My daughter's voice rising. Is trying to calm her down. I didn't catch every word, but I didn't need to. I knew what came next. They'd underestimated me their whole lives. And now, for the first time, they were scared. The next morning, Clara wouldn't even look me in the eye. But I smiled, packed my coffee thermos, and headed to my lawyer's office downtown. Because this time, I wasn't fixing anyone's furnace. I was fixing the family. The next morning, the world felt colder. Not weather-wise, emotionally. The kind of chill that seeps into your bones when you realize something's broken beyond repair. I drove into town in my old Ford. The same truck I'd used to take Clara to school years ago. Back then, she'd sit in the passenger seat with her lunchbox, humming songs from the radio. Now she wouldn't even offer a ride. Funny how time bends people. The law firm sat on the corner of Main Street, across from the old bakery. I'd known the man who owned both. His son runs the bakery now. But the smell of cinnamon rolls was exactly the same, comforting, grounding. When I walked inside, my lawyer, Edward Langston, was already waiting in his office. A silver-haired man with a sharp mind and the patience of a saint. "Walter," he said, standing to shake my hand. "Haven't seen you since Margaret's will was finalized. How have you been holding up?" I sat down and gave a small smile. "Holding up fine, Edward. But it seems my family thinks I'm past my expiration date." He raised an eyebrow. "That's so?" "They're trying to take the house," I said, setting a stack of folders on his desk. "The same one Margaret and I built together. The same one that's still in my name." He opened the folder and skimmed the first few pages. The receipts, the property record, the note to Trent. Edward looked up slowly. "You've been documenting everything." "I'm a mechanic," I said with a shrug. "You learn to keep records when one missing screw can kill someone." He smiled faintly. "So what do you want to do, Walter?" I leaned back, my eyes narrowing slightly. "I want to teach them a lesson. Not with anger, not with shouting, with proof." Edward nodded. "All right, let's start simple. What exactly do you have in mind?" I told him everything, from Thanksgiving night to the threats about declaring me unfit. Every word, every glance, every insult disguised as concern. When I finished, he didn't say anything for a while. He just looked at me, then the paperwork, then back at me again. "Walter," he said finally, "you've got more leverage than you think." I tilted my head. "Go on." "The deed is yours, which means legally they're your tenants. You could evict them with a 30-day notice if you wanted to. But if you're aiming for something more poetic, we can draft something cleaner. A transfer plan." I nodded slowly. "I don't want them homeless, Edward. I want them aware. I want them to see what happens when you treat the people who raised you like a burden." Edward folded his hands. "Then I'll draw up a sale contract. Quiet, official, and timed perfectly. We'll keep it in your name until the day you decide otherwise." I smiled. "Make it airtight." He chuckled. "You always did have that look, Walter. Like a man who fixes things just to see how they work." By the time I left the office, the sky had turned a steely gray, heavy with the promise of snow. I drove home in silence, letting the tires hum against the pavement. When I pulled into the driveway, Trent's car was gone. Clara's SUV was there, though, and the lights inside were dim. I walked in through the back door, the same one. I'd installed a new lock on last spring. She was sitting at the kitchen table, laptop open, her face lit by the blue glow of the screen. She looked up when she saw me. "Dad," she said quietly, "can we talk?" Her tone caught me off guard. Not sharp, not cold, just tired. I nodded and sat across from her. She hesitated, then said, "I'm sorry for what I said on Thanksgiving. It wasn't fair. Trent was stressed, the kids were loud, and—" I raised a hand gently. "Clara, stop." She froze. "I don't need excuses," I said softly. "I just need honesty. Tell me, did you mean it when you said I didn't contribute?" Her lips trembled. She tried to speak, but nothing came out. "It's all right," I continued. "You don't have to answer. But I want you to remember something. Every house you've ever lived in, I built the foundation for it. Every chance you ever had, your mother and I gave it. We never asked for payback, just respect." Tears welled in her eyes. She nodded slowly, but I could tell it wasn't sinking in. Not yet. As I stood to leave, she said, "Dad, are you moving out?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and said, "No, sweetheart, but you might be." I left her sitting there, staring at the table, and went back to my room. The next few days passed quietly. Too quietly. Clara avoided me, Trent stayed out late, and the kids acted like nothing had happened. Then, one afternoon, a black Mercedes pulled up in front of the house. Two men stepped out, wearing tailored suits and carrying briefcases. They weren't from the bank or the HOA. They were from Edward's office. I watched from the window as they walked up the driveway and knocked on the door. Trent opened it, confusion spreading across his face. The men handed him a thick envelope and asked him to sign for it. He did, and as soon as he closed the door, I could hear Clara's voice rise from the living room. "What is it? Who are they?" Trent tore open the envelope and froze. His voice cracked. "It's a notice. A property reassessment and—" His words trailed off. I stepped out from the hallway, calm as ever, coffee cup in hand. "Actually," I said, "it's a notice of transfer. Effective next month." Trent's eyes widened. "Transfer? What transfer?" "To the new owner," I said, sipping my coffee. "Me." He blinked. "You're selling the house." "To yourself?" I smiled faintly. "No, I'm taking back what was always mine." And that's when the real panic began. The silence that followed was almost physical, a heavy, suffocating quiet that filled the house and pressed down on everyone inside. Clara's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes darting from the paper to me like she was trying to read a foreign language. Trent stood frozen, color draining from his face. "Dad," Clara whispered finally, "what are you talking about?" I placed my coffee mug down gently, the sound echoing louder than it should have. "What I mean," I said calmly, "is that as of January 1st, the deed, the mortgage, the insurance, everything tied to this property, will be solely in my name. The law firm filed the reassignment this morning." Trent stammered. You can't just do that. We live here." "You do," I said evenly. "For now. But tenants who abuse their landlord's kindness eventually find the lease terminated." He took a step toward me, his voice rising. "We're your family, Bruce. You can't treat us like strangers." I met his glare without flinching. "You did that for me last Thanksgiving." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Dad, please." "We didn't mean—" "You meant every word," I interrupted, my voice still steady but firm now. "And don't pretend otherwise. You drew your line that night. You made it clear what you thought of me. All I've done is make sure that line is respected." She covered her face, shoulders shaking. Trent turned away, muttering curses under his breath. I walked past them toward the garden door, stopping only to glance back. "Don't worry. I'm not putting you out on the street. I've already arranged something, for all of us." Then I stepped outside, the crisp December air biting my skin. The yard was quiet, dusted with a thin layer of frost. I looked toward the old Caroline roses, their bare stems trembling in the wind. They looked fragile, but I knew they'd bloom again. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat by my window, staring out at the snow beginning to fall. I thought about Caroline, her laugh, her warmth, the way she always believed kindness had limits but grace did not. She would have told me to forgive Clara, to let it go. But even she would have known, sometimes forgiveness needs a lesson to grow from. The next morning I made a few calls. The first was to Edward. "Make sure the notice goes public by Friday," I told him. "And have the press release ready by Monday." The press? He asked. You're going public? Not entirely, I said. Just enough to make them understand what they almost lost. Then I called the realtor, the one who'd handled most of my neighborhood's properties. List it, I said. Your house? She asked, surprised. Yes, I replied. Market value. But hold all offers until further notice. I just want the sign out front. By noon, a tall white for sale sign was planted at the edge of the yard. When Trent got home from work and saw it, he slammed the front door so hard the walls shook. Are you out of your mind? He shouted. What will people think when they drive by? That we can't afford our own house? I didn't even look up from my newspaper. Maybe they'll think it's time for a change. He stormed out, cursing, and Clara followed him with red-rimmed eyes. That night, I heard them arguing behind closed doors, words like embarrassment, inheritance, and he's bluffing. They didn't understand. I wasn't bluffing. 2 days later, Edward called. Bruce, the reassignment is finalized. Everything's back under your control. Good, I said. Now send them the statement. The one you drafted last night? Yes. When Clara opened the letter, I was in the kitchen making tea. She read silently, her lips trembling, then sank into a chair. Trent grabbed it from her hands and scanned the contents. His jaw tightened. You're donating it? He hissed. I nodded slowly. Part of it. The house, once you move out, will be transferred to a local veteran foundation. They'll turn it into a rehabilitation home. Caroline would have liked that. You can't do this, he barked. You're not thinking straight. I looked at him. That same man whose tuition I'd helped cover, whose car I'd repaired, whose bills I'd quietly paid when he thought I didn't notice. On the contrary, I said quietly, I've never thought more clearly in my life. He stormed off again, but Clara stayed. Her eyes were red, her voice small. Dad, why are you doing this? I set my teacup down. Because, Clara, sometimes the only way to make people see value is to take it away. You and Trent built this life assuming it would always include my help, my home, my money, my silence. But you forgot something. Every brick in this house was laid by my hands. Every flower out there was planted by your mother. This home was our legacy. And if that legacy has to die to teach you respect, then so be it. She sobbed quietly, whispering, I'm sorry, Dad. I really am. I looked at her, softening slightly. I know you are, but regret without change is just noise. For the next few weeks, the atmosphere was suffocating. They avoided me, whispering behind doors, making calls late at night. I could feel their desperation, the slow realization that I wasn't bluffing. Before continue, subscribe to the channel and tell where you're watching from now. Then one afternoon, a silver sedan rolled up the driveway. It wasn't Trent's, it was theirs. Clara's kids jumped out and ran toward me, laughing. Grandpa, Grandpa, look what we made! They handed me a crayon drawing. The house, the garden, and the three of us smiling together. I smiled, but there was a lump in my throat. Those kids still had purity, something their parents had long misplaced. That night, as the snow fell heavier, I wrote my final note to Edward. It was short but decisive. Effective immediately, the donation stands. But reserve one clause, should my daughter ever prove her worth through humility, compassion, and responsibility, the foundation will name a future property after her. Caroline's lesson. When the day finally came for them to move out, Clara stood on the porch with tears streaming down her face. Dad, where will you go? I smiled gently. Somewhere smaller, somewhere quieter. But don't worry, you'll always know where to find me. As the moving truck pulled away, I looked out across the yard one last time. The roses were starting to bud again, red against the snow. And I whispered, you were right, Caroline. Sometimes grace is the sharpest revenge. I locked the door, slid the key into my pocket, and walked down the path without looking back. Because some stories don't end in anger, they end in understanding. The frost hadn't lifted that morning. The sun came up thin and white, catching on the for sale sign now half buried in snow. I stood by the window with my coffee, watching the steam curl upward. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that only comes after something has broken for good. Clara and Trent were gone. The moving truck had rumbled away 2 days ago, its tail lights vanishing down the road. They hadn't said goodbye. Not really, just a few clipped words, some empty apologies that dissolved into the cold air. I told them I wished them well, but my voice sounded distant, like someone else's. Now it was just me in the house, my house. The one Caroline and I had built from the ground up. Every board, every nail, every inch of paint. and yet somehow it didn't feel the same anymore. The air was different. The laughter was gone. The echoes of what we'd been still clung to the walls. But even they were starting to fade. I turned from the window and picked up the letter that lay open on the counter. It was from Edward. "Bruce, the transfer to the foundation will finalize next week. They'll hold a small press event to acknowledge your donation. The media's already showing interest. Local news. Maybe even a national outlet." I smiled faintly. That was part of the plan. Not revenge for the sake of punishment, but to remind them, publicly and irrevocably, that character means more than comfort. I spent that day walking through the house, room by room. The kitchen still smelled faintly of cinnamon, Clara's favorite candle. The living room rug had a faint imprint where Trent's recliner had sat for years. Upstairs, the guest room where the kids used to sleep had a half-finished puzzle on the dresser. 1,000 pieces, edges done, middle empty. Just like us, I thought. That afternoon, Edward came by with a folder. "You ready for this?" he asked. "I've been ready for months," I said. He laid out the paperwork, pages crisp and final. With each signature, something inside me loosened. Not grief, not regret, but release. When I put the pen down, he said softly, "You sure you're doing the right thing, Bruce?" I looked at him for a long time before answering. "Edward, I spent my life fixing other people's engines, making sure things kept running, even when they broke down. But this family, this one needed to stop running before it could start again." He nodded slowly. "Then I'll see you at the event." When he left, I stood at the threshold of the front door. Outside, the wind was rising, scattering leaves across the driveway. A few neighbors had noticed the sign and slowed their cars to stare. They probably wondered what had happened. How the family that always hosted Thanksgiving was suddenly packing boxes and signing deeds away. By the weekend, the story had spread beyond the block. The local paper ran a small headline. "Retired mechanic donates $3.8 million home to Veterans Foundation." I didn't expect what came next. On Monday, my phone began to ring nonstop. Messages from old coworkers, people I hadn't heard from in decades. "Saw the news, Bruce. You're a legend." "Man, I wish more people were like you. Your wife would be proud." Even the foundation director called, thanking me personally for what he called an extraordinary act of compassion. But the message that mattered most came from Clara. It arrived as an email, simple and raw. "Dad, we saw the article. I don't know what to say. The kids asked why you gave the house away, and I didn't know how to explain it. Maybe because I still don't understand it myself. I'm sorry for how we treated you. I thought money made me secure, but I've never felt emptier than now. Trent's been quiet since it happened. I think he's ashamed too. If you ever want to talk, I'll listen this time. For real. Clara." I read it twice before closing my laptop. Then I looked out the window again. The yard. The roses still shivering beneath their blanket of snow. I wanted to respond, to tell her I forgave her. But forgiveness, I'd learned, isn't something you announce. It's something you live quietly. The next morning I drove into town. The foundation's event was modest. A few reporters, some veterans, a line of folding chairs under a white tent. They handed me a microphone I hadn't planned to use. "Mr. Hayes," one of the journalists asked, "why did you decide to donate your home?" I paused, looking out at the crowd. Their breath rose in clouds against the cold. "Because," I said slowly, "sometimes the things we hold on to the tightest aren't what we need. They're what we fear losing. And fear makes us selfish. This house wasn't built for greed. It was built for love. And if love can build something this strong, then maybe it can rebuild what's broken too." They applauded softly. Cameras flashed. But all I could think about was Clara, somewhere in her small apartment, maybe watching the coverage, maybe realizing what true ownership really means. Later that evening, as I packed my last few belongings into the truck, I took one final walk through the garden. The air was colder now, sharper, but the roses still stood, dark stems against the fading light. I whispered, "It's done, Caroline. It's finally done." Then I turned off the porch light, locked the door, and drove away. Miles down the road, my phone buzzed with one more message, a photo from Clara. The kids were in front of a small new house, smiling wide, holding a sign that read, "Welcome home, Grandpa, anytime." For the first time in months, I smiled. Not because I'd won, but because maybe, just maybe, we'd both finally learned what mattered. And yet, as the road stretched ahead and the town lights faded behind me, something deep inside told me this wasn't the end. Because in every family, redemption is just another story waiting to be told. The days after the donation ceremony moved slowly, like the calm after a long, punishing storm. Winter had settled in fully, cold enough that every breath left a small ghost behind. I had rented a small cabin on the outskirts of town, nothing fancy, just a place with a working fireplace and enough quiet to think. For the first time in years, I was truly alone. No footsteps in the hall, no muffled voices arguing behind closed doors. Just the sound of the fire cracking and the faint hum of an old radio. I thought a lot about Clara in those days. Her email, her words, they weren't hollow, not this time. There was guilt in them and confusion, but also something human again. Still, I didn't respond. Forgiveness needed space, and silence was part of that space. Then one morning, a letter arrived, hand-delivered by a courier from the foundation. Inside was a gold-embossed invitation. Mr. Bruce Hayes, you are cordially invited to the dedication ceremony for the Hayes Veterans Center, formerly your family home. The event will take place this Sunday at 11 a.m. We would be honored by your presence. Sincerely, Robert Keene, Director, Hayes Veterans Foundation. I sat with that letter for a long time, tracing my finger over the raised lettering. The house, my house, was no longer mine, yet they'd kept the name. Somehow that meant more than I expected. Sunday came bright and bitter. The drive into town was quiet, the roads lined with bare trees and thin snow. As I turned onto the old street, a strange feeling gripped me. Cars filled the driveway I'd once shoveled. Strangers walking across the same lawn where I used to teach Clara how to ride a bike. The front door stood open. A new brass plaque gleamed above it. The Hayes Veterans Center, for those who served and sacrificed. Inside, the house was transformed. The grand living room where family dinners had once ended in silence now held rows of chairs, flags, and framed photographs of veterans. My heart tightened. It was beautiful and unrecognizable. Then I saw her. Clara, standing near the back, dressed in a long gray coat. Her hair pulled up neatly, eyes searching. She wasn't here for attention. She looked nervous, uncertain, almost fragile. Her husband, Trent, wasn't beside her. When she saw me, her face faltered. For a moment, she looked like a little girl again, the one who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during Sunday drives. I nodded to her just once, then walked past and took my seat in the front row. The ceremony began with speeches from local officials and veterans who'd already benefited from the center. One man, a Marine in his 60s, spoke about finally having a place to call home. Another thanked the donors who made it possible. When the director took the microphone, he called my name. Mr. Hayes, would you like to say a few words? I hesitated but stood. The room went still. Cameras waited. Faces turned. I could feel Clara watching. I won't take much of your time, I said quietly. This house was once filled with memories, some good, some hard to bear. When I signed it over, I thought I was letting go of the past. But standing here today, I realize I was giving it a new one. Maybe that's what legacy really means. Not what you keep, but what you give away. Applause filled the room. But as I stepped down, I caught a glimpse of Clara, tears in her eyes, hands trembling. After the event ended, people gathered around for handshakes and photos. But Clara waited until the crowd thinned. Then she approached. Dad, she said softly, can we talk? I nodded. We walked outside into the cold air where the roses once bloomed in warmer days. The foundation had kept the garden too, carefully replanted and tended. I didn't think you'd come, she said. I didn't think you would, I replied. She smiled faintly. Trent didn't want to. He said it would just make things worse. But I needed to be here, to see what you did, to understand it. Do you? I asked. She looked away for a moment. I think so. You didn't just give up the house, did you? You were giving us a chance to see what mattered. I just wish I hadn't learned it too late. I sighed, the breath leaving me in a cloud. It's never too late, Clara. It's just harder the longer you wait. She nodded slowly, then reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small box. A pocket watch. Old and worn. This was Mom's, she said. I found it in one of the drawers when we were packing. I thought it belonged to you. I took it in my hand. The weight of it felt like memory itself. Inside, the tiny engraving read, "For every second you gave us, love, Caroline." My throat tightened. She always had a way with words, I said quietly. Clara's voice cracked. Dad, I don't expect you to forgive me today, but I want to start again. Maybe visit you sometime. The kids, they miss you. I looked at her, not as the daughter who'd betrayed me, but as the woman trying to rebuild what she'd shattered. "I'll hold you to that," I said. She smiled through tears. "You mean it?" "Yeah," I whispered. "But next time you're cooking Thanksgiving." She laughed, a small, broken sound, but it was real. As she walked away, I stood there alone again, the house now glowing with lights and voices, not of family, but of purpose. Maybe that's what it was meant to become all along. Before I left, I wound the pocket watch and held it to my ear. Tick, tick, tick. Time moving forward again. But little did I know that single act of forgiveness was about to open another chapter, one I didn't see coming. The weeks after the dedication passed like soft echoes of something sacred. Life slowed, as if the world finally allowed me to breathe again. I'd wake each morning in that quiet cabin, light the fire and make my coffee, and watch the smoke curl up through the chimney like whispers of the past, leaving me one wisp at a time. The house, the Hayes Veteran Center, became a story of its own. Every morning paper had a piece about it. Elderly man donates mansion to help veterans. The headlines made me laugh. I wasn't a hero. I was just an old man who finally learned the difference between having everything and keeping nothing. But then one afternoon, about 2 months later, the phone rang. I almost didn't answer. I rarely did anymore. But something in me, a faint curiosity, made me pick it up. "Dad?" It was Clara. Her voice was shaky, but this time not angry or defensive, just small, fragile. "Clara," I said softly, "you sound upset." There was a pause, then a breath. "It's Trent. He's gone, Dad. He left. Packed his things and walked out. Said he was done pretending." I sat back in my chair. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I didn't call for sympathy," she said quickly, trying to sound strong. I didn't know who else to talk to. The kids keep asking where he is. I can't lie to them anymore." The silence between us stretched long and deep. Then I said, "Come visit, Clara. Bring the kids. Let's have dinner. I'll cook." That Sunday, I cleaned the little cabin until it gleamed. Bought a roast, mashed potatoes, even baked a pie the way her mother used to. When I saw Clara's car pull into the gravel drive, my heart did something it hadn't done in years. It raced. The kids tumbled out first, running toward me with shouts of "Grandpa!" and laughter that broke something open in my chest. Clara followed, her eyes red but smiling. Inside, we ate together. The kids talked about school, their dog, and a play they were rehearsing. Clara mostly listened, quiet but present, like someone learning how to breathe again. After dinner, when the children had dozed off on the couch, she turned to me and said, "I went to the foundation last week." "Oh?" They showed me the donation record. "I saw the clause you added. The one that transfers a trust fund to the foundation if the family ever tries to contest the house again." I smiled faintly. "Smart contracts don't just belong to business people, Clara. Sometimes they belong to fathers who've learned the hard way." Her voice softened. "I also saw something else. You left me and the kids as secondary trustees, didn't you? For the education program?" I nodded. "It's not inheritance, Clara. It's responsibility. I didn't want to leave you money. I wanted to leave you meaning." Tears gathered in her eyes. "I don't deserve that." "Maybe not then," I said gently. "But now, maybe you do." She reached over the table, taking my hand for the first time in years. "I'm sorry, Dad, for Thanksgiving. For everything. I thought I was protecting my life. But I was just burying the only thing that made it worth living." I squeezed her hand. "We all get lost, Clara. What matters is whether we find our way back." We sat there in silence, the fire painting our faces in orange light. It felt like home. Not the house we lost, but the family we almost did. Then she smiled, a small trembling thing. "You know, the Veterans Center has a family volunteer day next week. They asked if you'd come. I told them you'd probably say no." I chuckled. "Well, maybe you shouldn't speak for me just yet." Her eyes lit up, the first real spark of warmth I'd seen in years. A week later, I found myself standing once again in front of my old home. Only now, it was alive in a different way. Children's laughter rang out in the garden. Veterans and families worked together, planting new rose bushes where my Carolines used to grow. I rolled up my sleeves and joined them. The soil was cold, but it felt right in my hands. Honest, forgiving. As I dug into the earth, a familiar scent of roses filled the air. Those same deep red ones Caroline loved. And for a moment I could almost feel her there beside me, smiling, whispering, "See, Bruce? You didn't lose them. You found them again." I looked up to see Clara kneeling beside her children, helping them plant a seedling. They laughed, dirt on their faces, their joy unfiltered and pure. When she looked at me, she mouthed the words, "Thank you." I nodded. "No," I whispered. "Thank you for coming home." That night I sat by the fire again, the pocket watch in my hand. Tick, tick, tick. Each second no longer a reminder of time lost, but of time reclaimed. I had spent my life building things that could be taken. Now I'd built something that couldn't. Family, dignity, peace. And as the clock struck midnight, I closed my eyes and smiled. Because for the first time since Caroline's passing, I didn't feel alone. The world outside was quiet, but it wasn't empty. It was full of roots, forgiveness, and the slow, steady rhythm of a heart finally at rest.